but we will be taking some additional components off. Obviously the first thing you're going to want to do when you're working on this is we are going to jack it up and drain all of the coolant out of the vehicle. So that's going to be the first step that we do, and then from there we will start removing components from the top so that we can easily access the intake manifold and the sensors and the hoses that we need to remove to get this done. George, you excited?
Yep. Wife gonna finally leave my mutant alone. All right.
All right. Yeah, let's go ahead and get it. Alright, so here we are under the car. Obviously looking towards the forward view. And you see right here where the engine and trans made up, there's this cool access port here on the lower splash panel. And there is if you have it, and there is a white valve in there that you can spin counterclockwise and drain the coolant out of the car.
Oh shit.
There we go.
Look at the original coolant.
It's blue. And then once you have that cracked open, it will drain a little bit faster if you remove the radiator cap. There you have it. And then we're just going to go ahead and let this drain. Sort of make a mess when we remove the intake manifold. So we're under the bumper, or under the front of the car now, if you will. And you've got these plastic clips that secure the bumper to this lower cooling plate here. You're going to need to remove all of them across the line. See how many there are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 is what I'm counting. Could be off by 1 or 2. Additionally, you're going to have, at least on the Coupe, these two 10 mils on the very edges that we're going to have to remove. And then we will move to the fender wells and the cooling plate as far as removing the bumper. Obviously our radiator is still draining a little bit. Expect about 2 gallons out of that. Alright, and then you have one Phillips head screw on the inside of each fender well. It's kind of hard to see if you reach up into the bumper. You go ahead and remove both of those. You see George getting both of those. And then from there, you will need to remove this upper cover plate here so that you can access the top 2 bolts that hold the bumper onto the car. You'll have the 2 clips here, as well as the clips on the side that hold it in place. And once you're done with that, you're going to need to get the upper ears out, lift up on the hood release, and should just slide right out of the car.
Those are Allen.
Yes, they are.
Neither is Allen.
Well, like I was saying, you have these 2 bolts up here at the top of the bumper, and then to the last actual securing method that holds the bumper onto the car. The sides have a press fit clip. We're going to have to give a medium-sized tug to. It'll pop right out, and we'll remove the bumper. Some of these are 10 mil, and some of these are Allen. I don't really know why it is which on which car. Good. So you just give a small outward pull, it'll pop. And then from there, you have the clips underneath the headlights, and once again, you just give a forward medium pull, and those pop right out as well. Sometimes tracing it with your finger is the best way to do that. Sometimes not. There we go. And there you have the front bumper off the Coupe. The next thing that I personally recommend doing, it opens up some room for you to work on the car, is going to be to actually remove this upper radiator support. It does have some 10 mils in it. You're going to need to remove these here that hold the AC condenser on. And there's 1, 2, and 3 on both sides, as well as these 2 up here. And that's what we're going to move on to doing now. And there's just 10 mils as well. Now the primary reason I have behind removing this panel off of the car for a supercharger install, I'll walk you over here, it is for ease of access to these lower securing bolts on the supercharger manifold. it just opens them up and gives you much easier access to them when you're installing this onto the car. You'll see that later. Like I said, we still have the additional ones on the back side right here as well. There's one right next to the hood prop and a similar position over on the other side. So then we still have the two back ones that we will remove now. Sometimes a little bit easier with a ratchet and a 10 mil socket. Ah, there it is.
It's a 10 mil.
It is a 10 mil. And none of these should be outrageously tight on the car. They're just used to hold that front supporting brace on. And it does add some rigidity to the car.
Still like the old school Hondas, just take it off and never put it back.
Yeah, right, that'll work. Wait, you're back. Alright, so we're actually going to go ahead and remove the battery so that we can access this one here, which you can actually get to with that ratchety open end. But I think George is being George.
Yeah.
Just for proof of concept. Yes.
You know what I think?
Someone with a shaking disorder is recording.
That computer, I mean that doesn't have enough memory card.
That's possible. Contact. We're going to go ahead and be removing the battery anyway. I strongly recommend that whenever you're playing with electrical connectors or anything on this car. So this is just another step. Obviously removing the battery is pretty easy. You have the battery hold down bracket and you have your power and ground wires that you will be removing. There is the tie down bracket. And you can install this kit into the car with the factory battery location. I actually have one in the driveway like that. Just loosen those up a little bit. They go ahead and come right off. And then we go ahead and pull the battery out. Now from here, the next thing you're going to want to do is this thing here. You just go ahead and give it a push and it falls off the back. So that's released, and then we'll go ahead and lift up on these. You can leave these installed and tight. They just slide over the top tabs on the radiator. When we lift this off, there is going to be a wire that we need to disconnect and unclip from it in order to get clearance. There we go. And then there are a couple of clips back here we need to unclip. You see this wire here is attached to this bar all the way across. See if we can get you close up on that. We'll need to be removing that from this bar.
Am I going to do it my way?
George is going to do it his way. It may take a moment, but it will get done. I guarantee you that. So actually reaching in with a very small screwdriver, and we're going to disconnect each one of those clips, as George is very peculiar about the clips on his car. Not a bad thing at all. Completely unrelated, but I'm jealous, George, because your radiator already has insulation strips on the fans.
No way.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, bro, that's cool. But it doesn't have any on the front and all the other shit.
Yeah, correct, it does not. But mine didn't have it there at all. Didn't even look like it'd been worn off, it just looked like it'd never been there.
People don't know that the Coupe was not over-engineered.
The Coupe is. You got them cool little flappies underneath. I kind of want a Coupe now. Alright, and then you will still have the hood latch wire attached, which you can either just rotate that out of the way, or you can unbolt the hood latch. It's really up to you. I generally just rotate it out of the way.
Might be good, but I'm probably going to just take it off. Okay. Alright, so we wound up taking off the crossbar with the hood latch. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to start taking off the intake, some of the associated wiring, and the cover and this upper radiator hose.
I'll get that. Go ahead and hold that. We'll let George disassemble the car since it is his after all. So we talked about removing this upper radiator support for ease of access when installing the supercharger. It also does make things a lot easier to access as far as, say, the brace underneath the manifold, which is right here. That'll need to be removed. Unclipping the wiring harness here and just accessing things in general inside the car. If any of you ever try to take an RBC manifold off with this piece on, it can be sometimes a little bit of a pain. Sometimes they fall right out. But having removed this brace will make this a much easier task. So we see up here, George has gone ahead and undone all of the straps, the MAF sensor, and is now going ahead and removing the intake elbow with the vacuum lines running to it and pulling that whole assembly out of the car. We've also got the battery out of the car as it just kind of opens up some space to work. The glories of factory connectors. There we go. Got that first hose off. And here's removing where it was connected to the radiator. You can see it kind of wiggling over there. And the vacuum lines. There we have the upper portion of the airbox out. Moving on from there, we're going to go ahead and disconnect the vacuum lines that run from this hard metal line here, which run back up to your evap.
50,000 miles.
Don't forget to clean your air filters. We're going to remove these lines that connect to these this metal support bracket here that run back to your brake and evap sensors. We're not deleting these off the car, we're just removing them so that we can remove the intake manifold. We're also going to be undoing some wiring here, like unplugging the the map sensor. And we're going to be taking this cover off, so on and so forth. Just the two 10 mils on the cover, and then there is a press fit stud which is going to kind of pop off like the bumper did. That is a component that will not be going back on the car with it being supercharged. You can just remove that bracket. And you've got the 10 mil that holds the map sensor wire on to the intake manifold. We'll be removing the bracket and then we'll take the bracket off of the wires. We won't be using it later. You've got the ground wire, which will be relocated after the supercharger is installed. We'll just be running it up here to this valve cover 10 mil up there, or really any place where you get a good ground. Going ahead and unclipping the injectors. Obviously there are 4 of those. And then there are these little tabs up here you can see he's pushing forward on, and it completely comes off of the fuel rail. Once we remove those vacuum lines, we'll have more room to get that out. So next we're going to remove these 2 vacuum lines on the intake manifold. Various ways to do that. See here is just remove the clamps at the 2 metal bars and breaking them free with some pliers. After that, they should pull free.
This one's always a pain.
I think that one's the evap. Alright, now that those are free, we can go ahead and flip the injector harness out of the way. Ease of access.
4th of July.
Fireworks. So we do have one last vacuum line that we're going to go ahead and remove next, and that is your positive crankcase ventilation hose, which runs from your PVC valve there to the intake manifold here. Just in the essence of grouping like items together. can see there he is removing the clamp from the actual PCV valve, and then we're going to pull the hose off of there. Get out of his way. Sometimes taking things apart help. So we're going to go ahead and remove the bracket from the AC line, just another 10 mil, move it out of the way so we can get to that PCV valve a little bit easier. And this line here is rather soft as far as being metal, but yet still pretty resilient. We're actually going to be bending that later out of the way. You can go about that a few different ways, but we'll have it in the video. And obviously this upper EP3 or 8th gen idler pulley will also be removed. So again, these older vacuum lines, when mixed with heat and vacuum, they do sometimes kind of stick onto whatever they're attached to. So sometimes they are a little bit of a pain to get out. Just grabbing them with a pair of pliers or something and getting them to twist will generally break that friction seal, if you will. So all of these components, the intake manifold, throttle body, fuel rail, we're all going to remove as one component, and we do like to keep all of our stock parts just in case projects change. That hose is going to need to come off regardless, whether you run it to your new supercharger kit or whether you run it to a catch can or just vent to air. Alright, so moving on from there, we're going to go ahead and remove this 10 mil from the front of the throttle body that holds on that wiring harness there.
I'm just going to take the clip out.
We'll remove the clip, that works too. And then disconnect the connector just to the left of that. You lift right here where my finger is, and once you lift on that, you pull it forward and slide it, and it disconnects like the ECU. And that just kind of gives us a little more working room around that intake manifold brace.
One thing we don't have yet, which might happen, we might break the fucking
knock sensor?
Yeah, the knock sensor.
I doubt we'll break the knock sensor.
Well, we'll see.
We will see.
14? No, 12. Okay.
Yeah. So the RBC intake manifold, like most of the K-series intake manifold, does have a support brace on it. You can see it here. It mounts to the bottom of the intake manifold, and then it mounts to the block down there, just past the clutch slave cylinder. So we're going to go ahead and remove that, and then we will remove all the perimeter bolts off of the intake manifold and pull the intake manifold off.
We're going to get the last bolt in the manifold. Should be the only hard one, I believe. It's the one right under the, I don't know if you can see it there, right over the crossover, right here. It's at an angle, so I'm just going to use a swivelly point from the bottom. Believe it or not, installing the Mercracing manifold will be easier than messing with the OEM manifold.
So what we're doing here is we're actually going to loosen or remove the 12mm bolt down here that attaches the coolant crossover hard line to the front of the block, so we can kind of pivot it out of the way and give us access to getting the intake manifold out a little bit easier. There's a clip underneath it. So just push away from the connector and slide right out.
There we go.
So there's that out. And then here is the bolt we were talking about. We just removed the harness from it. And this is just to give us a little more wiggle room to get the RBC manifold out without pulling the studs, because it's kind of hard to do with the manifold on. So you guys can see how long it takes to remove the stock intake manifold. If you guys want to check it out and see how long it takes me to install the Mercracing manifold and supercharger on my car, I think the title of that video is Installing a Supercharger in 13 Minutes. I'm about to swap out with George here. Show him the K-way.
I don't want to do it that way.
Yeah. Trade me.
Huh?
It'll be okay.
No, we will not be bending my studs. It's almost out. So you can see this is where it's hitting, right there in that corner.
This section here against these studs.
Right, literally right there. That's why we got to shave it off for the Mercracing manifold.
Okay. Oh, I hate this manifold.
Yeah. Hold on. Here.
You gonna remove this bolt back here?
I could make it easier. But I didn't want to take all this crap out yet. Alright, we'll put the manifold tag out and we'll go ahead and remove the air intake box because I am doing the motor mounts anyway.
Alright, so for the air intake box, you've obviously got the mount here and here. And then there's one more down there. See that 10 mil? And then the air box will be out. This right here just slides off. Really appreciate you guys struggling through this with us. All right. So, there we go. George is rather particular with his cars. I would have vice gripped the studs.
Yes, you would.
Alright, stock airbox is removed. And the bolt that we're actually going to be removing is going to be this 10mm bolt that secures the wiring harness. It actually also secures the black coolant crossover bar. There we go. So now this whole entire black line, as you can see, we're able to shift it forward. It'll give us a little more clearance. Oop, my fingers are pushing everything in the way. Where the crossover line is underneath the intake manifold, and should make this, pulling this out, a breeze. Should.
In theory.
There we go. So we got this side off. Just try and pull the right side off the stud first. You may have to sink the left side. There we go. Pivot. 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 If you don't get the reference, you're too young.
Alright.
Holy moly. Alright, so we now have this off, but we still have a coolant line attached to the bottom of the intake manifold, which is right here. It has one of those OEM squeeze clamps on it, and that is the hose that will be running to the K24 coolant bypass. And you will never have to mess with that hose when removing an intake manifold again, which is a saving grace in and of itself.
Leave this in it.
I'm gonna set you down for a moment while I system with that. Shouldn't go anywhere. That's what I actually found, is that if I turn it this way, manifold down. There we go.
Hey,
It's just loose.
it's loose now.
There we go.
You guys notice it's easier to do it with two guys?
Sometimes that is the fact. So here's your whole intake manifold removed. As you saw, this is the section we were speaking of, that the K20Z3 and the K24 A2 both have incorporated into the intake manifold, that will not be on the Mercracing Supercharger kit. And that is why the K24 coolant adapter is needed. I'm going to go ahead and set this down.
Yeah, let's see what 50,000 miles look.
Actually not that bad. Stock tune. Mine are much cleaner. E85 does that.
Yeah, it does. It doesn't look bad.
Alright, so from here, next thing that we're going to be doing is we're obviously going to remove these studs. Look at that, the OEM intake manifold gasket.
Ew.
We're going to remove these studs, the 13 years of oil accumulation, these little pockets in the head, which do nothing but look gross. And then we will be taping this off, and we will come back when we are starting to clearance this right here for the new intake manifold. Alright, so for these studs, I have had some questions. Many of you are probably saying you got it, but some don't. So for these studs, we're going to be removing them, and the way we're going to remove them is called the two-nut method. So what you're actually going to do is you're going to take the first nut and sink it all the way down, or nearly all the way down, and put a second nut on there, and then use the back nut in a loosening motion, and it'll lock the two nuts together and it will pull the stud right out of the head. So there you see we have the rear nut on, putting the front nut on. Go ahead and use 2 wrenches or a wrench in a socket to tighten them together, and then we'll just go ahead and pull it all the way out. The same applies to removing the studs from the intake manifold for the throttle body, or any other studs that you're going to find on a Honda. I used to think they were all cast in and not removable, but they're all threaded.
Knock sensor's still alive.
Woo, knock sensor still in one piece. Forewarning, the knock sensor on these is a little fragile, so be careful around it. If the two nuts are locked together enough, you can use the outer nut. There we go, and this stud is out. So you're going to repeat that on the other one, and then clean some stuff up.
We're showing you a little clip here of the final installation of the supercharger. We still got to build the airbox tube. I'll be doing that today this afternoon. But yeah, that concludes the number 2 video, which shows you how to take just the components apart for those who may not know how to do it and want to go at it yourself. It wasn't hard. The hardest part was taking the original manifold out. Installing the Mercracing kit was actually very simple. We'll go through the modifications that we did with the section of the water pump housing and the installation of the K-tuner manifold bypass. Can't see it, it's too dark, but you'll get the point once we get to the video. Alright, I hope you guys enjoyed this first section of the video. This is like day 3, so we did it in 2 days because we stopped on day 1 due to some issues we encountered with setting up the K-tuner, but we'll talk about that. Alright guys, here you go, on to the next video. See you guys later.